putrefied rats, spider, and all crumbled into dust and were replaced by a well-scrubbed kitchen table occupying the same space as the desk from the shop had. A woman was seated at the table. She was wringing her hands and staring into the single candle in front of her. Its light barely reached the walls. There was the sound of a door being opened, and a man came out of the gloom. "Well?" said the woman. "No, far from well," said the man. "The news or himself?" she said. "Tell me plainly how it goes with the old man." "Beyond all help in this earthly realm," he replied. "He's dead?" she asked. "He is that," he said. The woman immediately started to cry. "Thank ye, Spirit," said Scrooge. "I thank ye. There can be none so bad that someone might not grieve a little at their passing." "I went again this morning to ask for a week's delay," said the man. "And once more I was told he was indisposed. I believed it to be a mere excuse to avoid me, but as I left, I saw Mrs. Dilber hurrying away with a bundle, and she told me not only he had been taken ill, but he had died that very morning. We're released." "Now, the debt still stands?" she asked. "It does, and no doubt it will be transferred, but that will take time, and in that time we can save. There's not a creditor as bad as he is, my dear. Whatever the future may bring, our circumstances have improved immeasurably with that grabbing miser's death." Both of them began that queer business of laughing and crying at the same time, as one does when one is overwhelmed with grief. "You've done as I asked," said Scrooge. "This house is indeed happier for this man's death, though it's a hard lesson to learn. I beg you, show me some mercy connected with this moment." Marley swept the blade, and the set changed. Another large object sat in the middle of the space. Not a table this time, but a bed. A once grand four-poster, now shorn of all but the barest of coverings. Scrooge recoiled in terror, for upon the uncurtained bed there lay, under a ragged sheet, a body. It was picked out of the darkness by a sickly limelight. Where this light touched, Marley could see chains starting to form and wrap themselves around the corpse. Marley knew what, no, who was on the bed. This was a place he'd visited more than once this night. Scrooge, though, seemed determined not to look. He stood staring away into the gloom, either in defiance or terror. Marley could not tell which. Marley pointed at the tableau. Scrooge stayed steadfast, but still Marley pointed. The head was so carelessly covered that the slightest movement would have dislodged the sheet. Marley wished for a breeze, but the air was still. He was wondering if he should lift it himself, confront Scrooge with the reality, when he heard a cold and sonorous voice come out of the darkness. "O cold, cold, rigid, dreadful death, thou hast set up thine altar here, and dressed it with such terrors as thou hast as thy command. This is thy dominion," it intoned. At the sound, Scrooge's hands leapt to cover his eyes, and he fell to his knees. "What was that? Spirit, was that you?" "And ye, though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil," said the voice. Out of the shadows came a figure of a man. It was burnt and twisted, skin blistered and cracked from fire, eyes hollow and scratched, as if 100 birds had pecked them out. Marley had to summon all his courage not to recoil at this sorry sight. "Those sins that have been put upon your shoulders by others, those black penances, those dark woes, I hereby release. Let none hold you to the earth." The blind priest, the Reverend Crow, for it was he, made a pass above the body, and some of the newly formed chains vanished with a sigh. This was not enough for the Reverend. He began to plead with the corpse. Another sermon, but this one out of desperation. "Our sins are not recorded in some celestial ledger. We alone are the keepers of our moral debts." As he spoke, he beat the wooden bedhead with his hands and sermonized with such passion that blood was drawn from his fists and began to sprinkle over the corpse. Where the blood touched a chain, it dissolved it into nothingness. But as much as he injured himself, Reverend Crowe slowed not one jot and continued with his sermon with all the passion he'd ever had. Keep not your faults, your regrets, for they will hang on you all too willingly. Remember all of the good that you brought into the world, your love, your compassion. They may seem fleeting, but they are what will save you in the end. As the sermon finished, the priest at last noticed his hands. I forged chains for the others in my life, and now I give my blood to release poor souls from bondage. I wish that I could give more, he said, and then he went back into the darkness again. The chains on the body had been much reduced by the priest's intervention. More than half had been expunged. Spirit, said Scrooge, who had at last uncovered his eyes, who interceded on the part of this man? Was it some great redeemer? No, he's not, thought Marley. But he's a better priest in death than he was alive. I shall not lose the lesson of this place, Spirit, said Scrooge. I resolve to make that great confessor's task less onerous once it is my day to be brought to account. Again Marley pointed towards the body. No. What good would it do, asked Scrooge, for me to see the face of this poor unfortunate? Marley wanted to press the point, but out in the darkness he saw a shape, tall and with a robe that was fashioned out of the very shadows. Not the Reverend Crowe, but the king again, advancing, ever advancing. Marley swung the scythe. Dark bedchamber flicked into the stark white of snow. Where the bed had been was now the great hole of a grave. Marley pointed towards it. It seemed that he had last got Scrooge's attention. I understand you, Spirit, said Scrooge. This is the grave of that wretched man who we saw before, and a fine plot for him indeed. Weed-strewn in the shadow of a wall and a yew tree. Yes, but a very fitting plot. The tree towered over the grave. In its figure, Marley thought he could see the shape in the knotted branches of the vengeful king. One limb as a great hand sweeping down. Again, Marley pointed to the grave. Look, man, look at the name, understand the commission. Before I draw nearer to that stone to which you point, said Scrooge, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of things that will be, or are they the shadows of things that may be only? How was Marley supposed to know? Why take it into his head to become a philosopher at this juncture? Just look at the grave. Men's courses will foreshadow certain ends to which, if persevered in, they must lead, said Scrooge. But if the courses be departed from, the ends will change. Say it is thus with what you show me. Now, Marley could nod, or he could shake his head. Perhaps if he gave the blasted man an answer of some sort, he may be inclined to do what he was told and look at the grave. All the while, the tree grew more into the shape of a man. But no! Why should he give Scrooge an answer? If he was to say yes, then he was letting the old coot off the hook by saying that if he just said sorry, everything would be fine. If he answered in the negative, then, well, no doubt Scrooge would just continue to be as bad as ever he had. The only thing to do was to do nothing. The grave. Look upon the grave and learn the damn lesson, he thought. Don't blame me, your sister, your teacher, your sweetheart, your nephew, your friends, your enemies. Don't blame the spirits, or God, or your director. The ghost king was now fully formed and towering over the scene. At last, Scrooge crept towards the grave on his knees, trembling as he went, and followed Marley's pointed finger. He read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge. Am I the man who laid upon that bed? He cried upon his knees. Marley risked a glance at the tree. It was just its good arboreal self again. At last, Marley nodded slowly. "No, Spirit, oh no!" Scrooge sprung up to his feet in front of Marley and began to press his case. He promised that he would become a good man, that he himself would become the very spirit of the season. But as he was doing so, he was backing up towards the wide and gaping hole of the grave. Oh, too late. Marley tried to save him, but Scrooge's foot stood on the edge of the hole, which crumbled underneath him and sent him tumbling backwards. As he went, he grabbed onto Marley's dark robe. It held him fast for a moment, but then slipped from Marley's shoulders and tumbled down into the dark hole after Scrooge. Did Marley see recognition in his partner's eyes just before he fell out of sight? He could not tell. Also, Marley could not see the bottom of the grave and had the queerest feeling that there was none to behold. Marley looked around. At last, he was back in the real world with his commission resolved. He wished nothing more than to find his old haunts and not have any more dealings with Scrooge. He turned away from the grave, and in front of him was the figure of the unrevenged king. Not made from stars or clouds or in the angle of a wrought iron gate, but unambiguously just him, there. Marley opened his mouth to speak, but before he could get a word out, the king advanced upon him. Marley stepped back. "The deed is done," said Marley. "The man did not know it was me, and he has confronted his mortality." Again, the king stepped forward. Again, Marley stepped away. I could do no worse, my lord," pleaded Marley, "and I charge that your spectral actors could have done no better." Another step from the king, another from Marley. The ground under his feet moved a little, but he kept his footing. What would you have me do?" he shouted. "What should my fate have to do with you? Tell me, Spirit, what do you want with me?" "Redemption!" screamed the Ghost King. Marley stepped once more, but his foot fell on empty air. He tumbled into the open grave. Down he went, further and further, the rectangle of night shooting away impossibly fast and impossibly far. Marley screamed as the air whipped past him and the darkness overtook him once more.